My name is Olivia Harmon. I'm 31 years old. When I was 24, my father stood at a podium in front of 188 people at my sister's college graduation party and said, "We always knew one of our girls was going to change the world. Tonight proves we were right about which one." The room erupted. My sister Zoe beamed from her seat at the center table, the one with the flower arrangement and the handwritten name card. I was at the folding table near the back, the one they'd set up because the venue ran out of the round ones, and I felt something inside me go very, very still. I set down my glass. I picked up my bag. I walked out through the side door and stood in the parking lot of the Hilton Garden Inn in Naperville, Illinois, for 9 minutes, just breathing. Then I drove home. Not to my parents' house, to my apartment, to the life I had already started building somewhere they couldn't see it. That was 7 years ago. And then, 4 months ago, my mom called me from a number I didn't recognize. She was crying before I said a word. "It's Zoe," she said. "Something's wrong. Something is really wrong." What she didn't know was that by then I'd become someone she couldn't have predicted from the version of me she'd cataloged and filed away. She didn't know about my promotion, my savings account, my lease renewal in Denver, my therapist every other Thursday, the quiet satisfaction of a life that belonged entirely to me. And she definitely didn't know that the daughter she'd spent 24 years overlooking was about to be the only person capable of pulling her family back from the edge. Let me go back, the Harmon family. 1407 Wicker Lane, Naperville, Illinois. Beige vinyl siding. A two-car garage with a basketball hoop that nobody ever used. A mother who alphabetized the spice rack, and a father who coached youth soccer on weekends even after his own kids aged out, because he liked being the man with the whistle. From the outside, we were a suburb success story. From the inside, we were a system with a predetermined winner. Zoe was born in 1991. I came along in 1993, 2 years apart. Two entirely different childhoods running parallel in the same house. Zoe was, by every metric my parents cared about, exceptional. Straight A's at Naperville Central, led in the school musical 3 years running. Full scholarship to the University of Michigan. My mother had a magnet on the refrigerator from the University of Michigan Alumni Association. It had been there since Zoe was 16 and had toured the campus as a sophomore because my mother had read that early exposure increased admission rates. I graduated with a 3.1 GPA and a partial scholarship to Illinois State. My mother told people I was going to Illinois State when they asked in the tone you use when you're answering a question you wish hadn't been asked. I changed my major twice. I finished with a degree in communications and a minor in marketing. My father once introduced me at a neighborhood barbecue as our other one. She does something with advertising. I was 23. I had a job title. He just didn't know it. The dinner table told the whole story. We ate at 6:30 every night. Same seats. Zoe to my mother's right. Me at the corner where the table leg made it slightly harder to pull your chair in all the way. My father asked Zoe about her thesis, her internship applications, her professors' names like he was memorizing them. He asked me, maybe twice a week, something vague. "How's work?" The question landed like an obligation he was getting out of the way. I started keeping track in the year I turned 15. I needed something solid to hold on to, something that didn't depend on anyone else's interpretation of reality. How many times my father mentioned Zoe by name at dinner versus me over a 3-month stretch? 43 to 11. How many times my mother asked me a direct question without pivoting mid-sentence to say something about Zoe? 8. How many times I started talking about something that mattered to me and watched one of them interrupt with something related to Zoe, like a signal I'd been transmitting had been picked up on someone else's frequency. 22. I kept the numbers in a notes app on my phone. Numbers were cleaner than feelings. They didn't ask to be comforted. The summer before Zoe's college graduation, my parents planned a party for 180 people. My mother had been planning it since Zoe's junior year, loosely, the way you plan something you already know will happen. She booked the Hilton Garden Inn banquet room 8 months in advance. She hired a photographer. She had a custom cake made with Zoe's graduation photo on it, blue and maize frosting, because Michigan colors, obviously. I drove up from Chicago for it, where I was working my second year as a junior account coordinator at a marketing firm downtown. I'd bought new pants. I'd gotten my hair done the day before. I made the 2-hour drive alone on a Saturday morning in May, telling myself it was going to be fine. It was just a party. I could handle a party. My seat was at the overflow table near the back of the room. My mother had texted me the seating chart the night before. The text said, "You're with the Hendersons and some of Dad's work people." It was the last spot. The Hendersons were neighbors we'd had since I was 9. Nice enough. The work people were 2 men I'd never met who spent the entire dinner talking to each other about a construction contract in Schaumburg. I introduced myself to Mrs. Henderson. She asked how long the drive had been. That was the full extent of our conversation. The speeches started at 7:15. My mother went first. She talked about Zoe's first steps, her first recital, her debate team championships, her internship at a law firm the summer before her senior year. The speech was 12 minutes. I was not mentioned once, not as context, not as a sister, not as a person who existed in the same childhood. Then my father stood up. My father had a gift for rooms. He'd been the kind of dad who got laughs at school events, who strangers warmed to immediately, who always knew when to pause for effect. He tapped the microphone twice, smiled at Zoe the way I'd watched him smile at her my entire life, like she was the only evidence he needed that everything had been worth it. "I've been practicing this speech for about 22 years, he said. The room laughed. The moment Zoe walked into a room, I knew. I just knew. Some parents hope. Some parents wonder. I never had to. We always knew one of our girls was going to change the world. Tonight proves we were right about which one." Applause. Loud, warm, genuine. 180 people who had no idea what that sentence cost. My mother pressed her hand to her chest, delighted. Zoe laughed and shook her head, the way you do when someone says something embarrassing that you actually love. My father raised his glass. I was at the overflow table. I was the other girl, the one the sentence excluded so naturally that most people in that room probably didn't hear it as an exclusion at all. It was just a compliment, just a father being proud, just a perfectly reasonable thing to say. I counted the seconds of applause. 14. I counted because I needed something to do with my hands, and the numbers were the only thing in the room that felt honest. I sat for 6 minutes after the speech. Exactly 6. Then I stood up, walked to the coat check, retrieved my jacket, walked through the lobby, and out into the parking lot. I sat in my car for 17 minutes. I didn't cry. I'd done the math on this moment so many times in therapy, which I'd been doing for 8 months at that point, that I'd already grieved it in advance. What surprised me wasn't the pain. It was how unsurprised I was. My mom found me before I left the parking lot. She'd seen me go, apparently. She knocked on my window, and I rolled it down, and she looked at me with the expression I knew well. Not concern exactly, more like the face of someone who'd been pulled away from something important. "You're not leaving." "I am." "Olivia, it's your sister's party. Dad just told 180 people you always knew which daughter was worth something, and he was right about which one." She made a short sound through her nose. He was talking about Zoe. It was a compliment. It was also a sentence that has another girl in it. "You're being oversensitive. You know how he talks." I did know how he talked. That was exactly the problem. Mom. I looked at her through the open window. Have I ever been at one of Zoe's events where it was also about me, even once? She didn't answer. She looked at her watch. 7:43 p.m. Then she said, "I can't do this right now, Olivia. Are you coming back in?" "No." "Fine. Don't make this a whole thing." She walked back toward the entrance. She didn't look back. I drove to a gas station on Route 59 and sat in the parking lot for 22 minutes. I bought a bottle of water and a pack of peanut butter crackers from inside, because I hadn't eaten enough at dinner. I drove back to Chicago in 2 hours and 11 minutes with the radio off. 0 texts from my family by the time I crossed back into the city. I checked 8 times between Naperville and the Chicago skyline. I stopped checking somewhere around Oak Park. I blocked my parents' numbers when I got home. I blocked Zoe's too. Then I sat at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and did what I'd been building toward without fully naming it. I started over. Not dramatically, just quietly, brick by brick. I changed my number 2 weeks later. I removed my parents from my social media. I made my accounts private and cleared out anyone connected to Naperville. I left the family group chat, the one my mother had created and updated approximately every 3 days with pictures of Zoe and forwarded news articles about topics she thought were relevant to Zoe's career. I spent one Sunday afternoon going through every thread and account, and I cut the connections cleanly, the way you remove something that's been embedded too long, carefully, completely, without apologizing for it. I kept two people. My cousin Ren, who had texted me at 7:58 p.m., the night of the party, "I saw you leave. That speech was awful. Are you okay?" And my best friend from college, Dana. Those were my people. That was enough. The year after, I threw myself into work. Long hours, a better title by the end of the year, a raise I'd negotiated for the first time in my life by writing out what I was going to say and practicing it twice, out loud in my car. I was good at the job in a way that had nothing to do with anyone's expectations of me and everything to do with what I'd quietly built on my own for years. In the spring of 2019, I took a job offer in Denver, senior account manager at a mid-size agency, $67,000 starting. I packed a U-Haul in March. I drove alone, 1,100 miles, windows cracked, a playlist I'd made for the drive, and a road atlas I'd bought at a truck stop in Kansas, because I liked the idea of having something physical to follow. I found an apartment in the Highlands neighborhood. 900 square feet, $1,650 a month. I painted the kitchen a dark sage green because I'd always wanted a green kitchen, and nobody was there to say it was impractical. I enrolled in therapy that fall. Every other Thursday, her name was Dr. Walsh, and she asked me in the first session what I was hoping to get out of this. I thought for a moment. "I want to stop rehearsing the conversation where they finally understand," I said. "Why do you want to stop?" "Because I've been having it in my head for 10 years, and they never do." She wrote something down. That was the beginning. I built carefully. Promotions, senior manager to associate director by 2021. Salary, $81,000. I paid off my student loans in full in February 2022, a Tuesday afternoon, standing in my kitchen in the green light of my sage walls, staring at the confirmation email for a long time. I cried, not because I was sad, because I had done it myself. Completely myself, with no cosigner and no safety net and no one calling to ask how it was going, and it was mine in a way that nothing on Wicker Lane had ever been mine. I made real friends. My neighbor Simone, who knocked on my door in 2020 with a bottle of wine because she'd seen me moving furniture alone and decided that was unacceptable. My work friend Grant, who brought me coffee during the back-to-back sprints we'd have before big client presentations. My running group friend, Elise, who asked 0 questions about my family and simply assumed, correctly, that I would prefer to talk about almost anything else. I dated. Carefully at first, then with more ease. In 2022, I met someone, a man named Fletcher, 34, an architect who asked good questions and noticed things. We dated for almost a year. One evening, he said, "You do this thing where you minimize your own plans when someone else has a preference. Like you've decided in advance that yours matter less." I sat with that for a long time, brought it to Dr. Walsh. We spent 4 sessions on it. I was still unlearning the architecture of a house I'd left 4 years ago. Fletcher and I ended things in early 2023, not bitterly. He'd given me something to work with, though. An awareness of the ways the old house still showed up in the new one. By late 2024, I felt like I had finally found the floor beneath the renovation. Good work, good people, my green kitchen, my Thursday runs along the South Platte, my every other Thursday with Dr. Walsh. I had gone 3 full weeks without thinking about my parents once. I noticed the absence of the thought the way you notice when a sound you'd gotten used to finally stops. I thought I was done. I thought I had sealed it. Then, on a Wednesday evening in November 2024, while I was making dinner, a chicken stir-fry, a podcast about architecture history playing from my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. 630 area code, Naperville. I almost didn't answer. I thought it was a robocall. I answered on the 4th ring. Olivia, my mother's voice, crying, crying before I'd said a word. I set down the spatula. I turned off the burner. "It's Zoe," she said. "Something's wrong. Something is really wrong." I didn't say anything for a moment. I stood in my green kitchen 1,100 miles from where I'd grown up, and I waited. She told me in pieces, the way people tell things they've been avoiding. Zoe had moved back home 6 months ago. After 4 years working at a firm in Chicago, she'd stopped. Not left. Stopped. She'd been passed over for a promotion she'd been certain she'd get, a position she'd been building toward for 2 years, and something had broken loose in a way that my mother kept describing as not herself and not doing well, and circling around with those soft phrases that families use when the real words are too concrete to say out loud. "Mom," I kept my voice level. "What is actually happening?" Silence. "Is she working?" "Not right now." "Is she leaving the house?" A pause. "Not really, no." "Is she seeing anyone?" "A therapist? A doctor?" The longest pause. "She won't go. She says she doesn't need to. Your father thinks she just needs to. Your father thinks she just needs time to recalibrate." I pressed my eyes shut. Recalibrate. The Harmon family version of "we see it, but we're not going to name it." How long has she been like this? Since June. It was November. 5 months. 5 months of my sister not leaving the house, not working, and my parents describing it as a recalibration. "Mom, what you're describing sounds like a serious depressive episode. That's not a timeline thing. That's not something she rests out of." "We don't know that it's you do know. You've watched it for 5 months. Her voice went tight. I didn't call to be lectured. "Why did you call?" Silence, then, softer. "Because she asks about you." I didn't expect that. I held the phone and waited. "She's mentioned you a few times. In the last couple months. Like she's trying to remember something she lost track of. She thinks you left because of her. Because she was closer to mom and dad and you felt pushed out, and she thinks you decided she wasn't worth staying for." I didn't leave because of her. "I know that. But does she?" I put the phone against my shoulder for a moment and breathed. "There's something else," my mother said. Her voice had shifted. Careful now. Controlled in a different way. "What?" "When you first stopped contact. The first few weeks. Zoe tried to reach you. She called your number and it was already changed. She tried to text once from a different phone, and we saw it, and we didn't pass it along. We thought, at the time, that it would be better for her not to. That it would just upset her more if you didn't respond. So we didn't tell her we'd seen it. We let her think you'd just gone completely dark." I set my phone on the counter and put both hands flat on the surface and stood there for a moment. They had seen Zoe try to contact me. They had said nothing. They had let both of us believe the other had chosen silence. 7 years. I called Dr. Walsh's line. We talked for 40 minutes. She asked me the same question she always asked when I was at a decision that mattered. "What are you actually deciding here?" I was quiet for a long time. "I'm deciding whether I can go back there and still know who I am when I come home." She didn't tell me what to do. She never did. That was the whole point. 3 days later, I called my mother back. Her number was 7 years old. It still worked. She answered on the first ring, which told me she'd been waiting. "I'm going to fly out," I said. "I need to see Zoe, but I'm going to need you and Dad to sit down with me first. Not to talk about Zoe. To talk about what happened 7 years ago in that parking lot and everything before it, and you're going to listen. Not respond, not justify, just listen." She was quiet. "And when I say Zoe needs professional help, you're both going to agree to stop calling it a recalibration, and you're going to help her get it, whatever that costs." "Olivia, that's not a negotiation, Mom." Another silence. "Okay," she said finally. One word. Quieter than I expected. I booked a flight. Denver to Chicago O'Hare. Tuesday, 8:05 a.m. T114 round trip. I packed for 3 nights. Planned to stay 2. I told Ren I was coming. She responded in 10 seconds. "I'll have food at my place if you need to decompress." I told Simone where I was going in broad terms. She said, "You know yourself." Trust that. I told Grant and Elise even less, but they both said some version of the same thing. You've got this. I landed at 11:40 a.m. I rented a car. I drove to my parents' house first. 1407 Wicker Lane. The beige vinyl siding looked the same. The basketball hoop was still there, slightly rusted now, the net frayed at one edge. A wreath on the front door that hadn't been there when I lived here. Small changes on top of a house that had spent years looking like everything was fine inside. My mother opened the door before I knocked. She looked smaller. There were lines around her eyes I didn't remember. She moved to hug me, and I stepped to the side and walked in. My father was in the living room in the same armchair he'd always sat in. He stood when I entered. Tall, gray at the temples now. The same expression, pleasant, composed, slightly inconvenienced by whatever emotional weather was moving through. Olivia. He said it like a statement. Hi, Dad. I sat on the couch without taking off my jacket. I told them to sit. They sat. Then I said it. All of it. Not shouting, not crying, just clearly, in the order it happened. The dinner table statistics I'd kept in my phone at 15. My mother's graduation speech that didn't mention me once. My father's toast. We always knew one of our girls was going to change the world. Tonight proves we were right about which one. The parking lot. 0 texts. The 7 years they'd spent letting Zoe believe I'd chosen to disappear. The message they'd intercepted and buried. My mother was crying before I finished. My father stared at the floor. I'm not here for an apology, I said. I don't need you to perform remorse. I need you to understand what actually happened, not the version you've been carrying around. The real version. My father opened his mouth. Not right now, Dad. He closed it. What I need from you today is simple. I'm going to go see Zoe, and she's going to know the truth about why I left. Not that I needed space, not that I drifted. The truth. And if she's willing to get help, real help, you're both going to support that financially and step back from directing it. You don't get to manage her recovery the way you managed the story of what happened between us. My mother wiped her face with her sleeve. We're her parents, my father said. I know. And you gave a speech in front of 188 people that announced which daughter mattered. So right now, being her parents isn't the credential you think it is. Help her. Get out of the way. In that order. I stood up. I left them in the living room and drove the 9 minutes to my parents' house, Zoe's temporary address, which was still my parents' house, which meant I had to call her from the driveway to ask her to come outside because I wasn't going back in until she knew. She came to the door in sweatpants and a university sweatshirt from Michigan. The collar stretched out. Her hair was in a knot that hadn't been intentional. She looked at me through the screen door for a long moment like she was checking whether I was real. Hey, I said. She pushed the door open and we stood on the front porch. And she said, You're here. I'm here. She looked at me the way you look at something you'd given up on and then forgot to stop looking for. Mom said you were coming, but I didn't actually think you would. I know. I need to tell you some things. We sat on the porch steps. The same steps I'd sat on at 12, at 16, at 20 before I left for Chicago. The same uneven second step that tilted slightly to the left if you sat on the right side. I'd forgotten that. It came back immediately. I told her everything I'd told my parents, from my angle. The speech, the parking lot, why I left, which was not about her. And then what my mother had just told me about the intercepted message. Zoe was quiet for a long time. They saw me try to text you, she said slowly. Yes. And they didn't tell you? No. She put her elbows on her knees and stared at the dead grass of November in Naperville. I thought you decided I was part of what you were leaving. You weren't. You never were. I kept thinking. She stopped. Started again. I kept thinking there must have been something I did, that I was so wrapped up in my own stuff that I didn't see what was happening to you right next to me, and you finally just decided I wasn't worth it. I didn't know what you saw or didn't see, I said, but I also know we were raised in the same house. You had your own version of it. She made a short sound, not quite a laugh. The golden child thing is its own trap, you know? You're not allowed to fail. You're not allowed to be mediocre. Every win just raises the floor for the next one. And then, when you do fail, she stopped, looked at her hands. Tell me about the job, I said. So she did. 4 years at the firm building toward a senior associate position. She'd been told informally she was the front runner. She'd prepared for it like a second job, and then in June they'd given it to someone with 2 more years of experience in a different specialty, and her manager had said something about not the right season for her trajectory. And Zoe had gone home that night, called my mother, and something had just not switched off exactly, but slowed, and kept slowing. I haven't felt like myself since June, she said. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and be fine, and instead, every morning I wake up and feel like I'm at the bottom of something. That's not a season, I said. That's not something you wait out. What you're describing has a name, and there's help for it. She looked at me sideways. I'm not diagnosing you. I'm saying you've been in the same dark room for 5 months and nobody has turned on a light. That's not stubbornness. That's the system not working the way it should, and systems like that respond to the right kind of help. She was quiet. Then, what kind of help? I'd researched before I came. There was an intensive outpatient program at a clinic in Evanston, 3 days a week, structured around cognitive behavioral therapy with a psychiatry evaluation at intake. Highly reviewed. Covered mostly by the insurance she was still on through my parents. I had the intake coordinator's name written in my phone. Mom and Dad would cover whatever the insurance doesn't, I said. I already told them. You told them. Yes. A long pause. You came here, she said, after 7 years, because I asked about you. Because you were drowning and the people responsible for keeping the pool safe were busy managing the aesthetics of the situation. She made that sound again, closer to a laugh this time. I'm still angry, I said. I want to be honest with you about that. I'm not here because everything is resolved. I'm here because you're my sister and because I think we were both handed the same broken thing and told to figure it out on our own. I think we can do better than that, but it has to start with you getting help. She looked at me for a long time. The November afternoon was getting dark, the way it does early in the Midwest. The sky going gray at the edges while it's still technically afternoon. Okay, she said. One word. Same as my mother on the phone, but different in texture. Less managed. More honest. I called the intake coordinator the next morning. They had an opening the following week. I sat with Zoe while she made the call herself, because I wasn't going to do it for her, but I was going to stay until she did. I drove her to my parents' house, her house temporarily, and I stood in the entryway while she told them she was starting the program next Thursday. My mother hugged her immediately. My father stood in the kitchen doorway and said, "We'll handle everything you need." It was the most useful sentence he'd said in my presence in years. Before I left, my father asked if we could talk. Briefly, I looked at him standing in his kitchen, 71 years old, smaller than I remembered, and I said, "Not today, Dad." He nodded. He didn't push. That was something. I drove back to O'Hare that evening. My flight wasn't till the next morning, so I stayed at a hotel near the airport. Nothing fancy, clean and quiet, and I ordered room service and sat on the bed and called Ren, who said, "How are you actually?" "Tired," I said. "But okay. Cleaner than I thought I'd feel." Cleaner? Like I said what needed to be said and didn't lose myself saying it. I flew back to Denver the next morning. It was a clear day, and when we broke through the cloud cover over the Rockies, I could see the peaks clearly, still snow-covered in November. And I thought about the green kitchen waiting for me and the run I'd take along the river on Saturday, and my appointment with Dr. Jokley, Walsh on Thursday, and I felt, specifically, grateful. Not for what had happened, for who I'd become inside of it. That was 4 months ago. Zoe has been in the program for 16 weeks. She calls me on Sunday evenings, not because anyone told her to, just because we started doing it after I got back, and neither of us has stopped. The conversations are still finding their shape. We're still translating, still learning the language of two people who grew up in the same house and had entirely different experiences of it. But they're real. No performance. No version of ourselves we're maintaining for anyone else's benefit. She's asked about our parents, twice, whether I plan to rebuild anything there, What I think she should do about the relationship when she's further along in her recovery. Both times I've said the same thing. That's yours to decide, and I'll support whatever you choose. But I'm not going to carry that map for both of us. My parents have emailed 3 times since November. Brief, careful messages, asking for updates on how I'm doing. My father wrote once, "We'd like to find a time to talk when you're ready." I haven't responded yet. That's not avoidance. It's a decision I'm still making, and I'm letting myself make it on my own timeline, which is something I've had to learn is allowed. My life in Denver is exactly as I left it. The green kitchen, the Saturday river runs, Simone standing Sunday morning coffee invitation that I accept about once a month, Grant's terrible movie recommendations that I watch anyway, Dr. Walsh every other Thursday who asked me 6 weeks ago, "What did this trip teach you about yourself?" I sat with that for a while. "It taught me I can walk into the place that made me small," I said, "and walk out still the same size I came in." She nodded. "And how does that feel?" "Like something I didn't know I needed to prove." Zoe calls this coming Sunday. She mentioned last week that she started a journal, something her therapist suggested, and that she's been writing about the things she wishes she'd said when we were growing up. She said, "I think I'm starting to understand what it was like to be you in that house." I said, "I'm starting to understand what it was like to be you, too." We're not going to be what we should have been. The version of sisters who grew up knowing each other, who had each other as a reference point during the years that shaped us, that's not available anymore. That ship has had 7 years of distance in it, but what we're building now is ours. No parental script, no assigned roles, no overflow table. Just 2 women who came from the same beginning and are finding out, slowly and honestly, who they are to each other now. People ask me sometimes, usually the voice in my own head at 2 a.m., whether I did the right thing going back, whether I should have stayed gone, whether showing up meant I was letting everything that happened become acceptable. It didn't mean that. I went back because Zoe was disappearing inside a story she hadn't written, and I was the only one who knew how to tell her there was a different version. I went back and I said what was true, and I helped her find the door, and then I drove back to my apartment and my green kitchen and my own life, which is mine in the way that nothing in that beige house on Wicker Lane ever was. My name is Olivia Harmon. I'm 31 years old. I was the other girl, the one the speeches forgot to mention. The one at the overflow table, near the back, close enough to see the flowers on the main table, far enough away that nobody had to think about me. I am not the other girl. I never was. I just had to drive 1,100 miles to begin believing it, and 4 more years of living to let it become true. If you're sitting at your own overflow table right now, the footnote in someone else's story, the one they got around to eventually, if at all, I want you to hear this. Their inability to see you was never information about your worth. It was information about their limitations. Build something they can't edit. Find your green wall, your river run, your people who knock on doors with wine when they see you moving furniture alone. And understand, deeply and without apology, that the size of someone's blind spot is not the size of your life. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since that November trip. Not in an abstract way, but in the specific, concrete way you think about things when you've lived through the consequences of choices that weren't even yours to make. My parents made a series of decisions over about 24 years. Small ones mostly, the kind that don't feel like decisions at the time. Who sits where at dinner? Whose applications you help with? Whose name you say out loud in rooms full of people? Each one felt like nothing. Each one was something. And the accumulation of all those nothings built a house where one daughter grew up knowing she was the main character, and the other daughter grew up knowing she was the supporting role in someone else's story. That's not dramatic. That's just what happened, tracked in a notes app by a 15-year-old who needed something honest to hold on to. And here's what I've come to understand about that. The choices didn't just shape me. They shaped Zoe. They put her on a pedestal so high that when she finally stumbled, as every person eventually stumbles, there was no soft place to land. Nobody had ever taught her how to fail quietly, how to be ordinary for a season, how to lose something and still be whole. My parents had spent 2 decades making her the proof of their success, and when the proof stopped being clean and easy, they called it a recalibration and looked away. That's not cruelty, it's a different kind of damage. It's what happens when you protect someone from difficulty instead of teaching them how to move through it. I think about ethics sometimes in the simplest terms. What do we actually owe each other? Not in a legal sense, but in the human sense. And what I've landed on, after years of working this out with Dr. Walsh and on my river runs, and at 2 a.m. when the quiet gets loud, is that what we owe each other is honesty. Not performed honesty, not managed honesty, real honesty. My parents owed Zoe and me the truth about what was happening in that house. They owed us both the chance to know each other without a script. They didn't do that, and the result was 2 women who grew up side by side and were strangers to each other for 7 years, and one of them nearly disappeared inside that estrangement. What I'm proud of is not that I went back. Going back was just a flight and a rental car. What I'm proud of is that I went back as myself. I didn't shrink. I didn't perform forgiveness. I didn't feel. I said exactly what was true, in the order it happened, without dressing it up or softening the edges. And then I helped Zoe find the door and walked back through my own. That's what I think resilience actually looks like. Not toughness. Not feeling. It's knowing who you are precisely when you're in the place most designed to make you forget. Zoe is learning that now, week by week in the program, in the Sunday calls, in the journal she started filling up. She's learning that losing a promotion doesn't mean she's the thing she failed at. I learned that a seat at the overflow table doesn't mean you're overflow. We're both still learning. That's fine. Learning slowly and honestly is still learning.